All thoughts and opinions expressed on WRHU's Queerly Informed do not reflect the views of Hofstra University, the Board of Trustees, or Radio Hofstra University. All contrasting thoughts or suggestions can be sent to programming at wrhu.org or to room 127, Herbert Hall, 111 Hofstra University, Hempstead, New York, 11549.
Welcome to an interview installation of Queerly Informed. I'm Camryn Bowden. Thank you for joining us. Today, Queerly Informed welcomes Congresswoman Sarah McBride. She is Delaware's at-large representative and the first openly transgender member of Congress since 2024. At a time when transgender people have been a target of Republican congresspeople and the White House, McBride sits down to discuss the importance of trans visibility in public office and the ongoing attacks on the community. I want to ask a little bit about, your coming to and kind of coming to understand that you're transgender. So you came out in 2012 in a open letter to the Eagle at American University. I want to read a quick little excerpt for our audience because it really is a really well-written essay. So you wrote, as SG president, I realized that as great as it is to work on issues of fairness, it only highlighted my own struggles. It didn't bring the completeness that I sought. By mid-fall, it had gotten to a point where I was living in my own head. With everything I did, from the mundane to the exciting, the only way I was able to enjoy it was if I reimagined doing it as a girl. My life was passing me by, and I was done wasting it as someone I wasn't. So how long had you been struggling with your gender identity prior to that, and what inspired you to come out to the entire student body in an open letter?
I decided to come out relatively publicly. I was student body president at American University at the time. And it was 2011 into 2012. It was before Time Magazine this is before your time, before Time Magazine put Laverne Cox on the cover with a headline, Transgender Tipping Point. It was at a point where even on my relatively gay and fairly progressive college campus, where I didn't know how the campus community would respond to a trans classmate, let alone a trans student body president. And I thought that the best way to get my news out there, because I knew people would talk, I knew people would gossip, was on my own terms and my own words. And I decided to first post that note on Facebook, which was at that point really the only social media platform anyone was using. And then when the student newspaper editor asked me if I would publish in the student newspaper, I thought, oh, okay, it's important to get this out there. And hopefully if I can share my story, not only will it change the way people talk about my news, but maybe it'll give them a reference point on broader topics impacting the trans community to foster empathy and compassion. And it was really the first time I saw very clearly how public vulnerability can sometimes be the quickest, most effective path toward justice, for people to be able to see us in our full humanity, and that includes in our vulnerability. And that was a really transformative moment for me, obviously, in coming out, but also in my understanding of how to reach people and how to talk to people.
Absolutely. So let's jump forward a little bit. In 2020, you won state senate election in Delaware. How did your time in the state senate in Delaware inspire your run for Congress at the federal level, at the national level? And how did the issues that you focused on while in state office transfer over to your time, well, now into your first term here in the House of Representatives?
So I had the privilege for almost 5 years, 4.5 years, to serve as the state senator for Delaware's first state senate district, which was the district that I was born and raised in. And when I ran for the state senate, I told people that I would be focused on passing paid family and medical leave and making healthcare a reality and affordable for more people in Delaware. And a lot of people said when I was running, especially on the topic of paid family and medical leave, you're never going to be able to get that done. It's too big, it's too much, it's too fast, it's too soon. And I got elected in 2020 in the midst of COVID. I became the chair of our Senate Health and Social Services Committee. And I set out to pass the largest expansion of the social safety net in modern state history to guarantee that people no longer have to choose between their health and their paycheck, between their family and their job. And so I rolled up my sleeves, dove into the details, met with people who agreed with me and met with people who disagreed with me. And we were able to pass my Healthy Delaware Families Act to provide up to 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave to Delaware workers, not in 10 years or 5 years, like some of the most optimistic observers predicted, but in 1 year and with bipartisan support. Later on, when I was about to leave in 2024, before I won the primary for Congress, I was still in the state Senate at the time, I set out to pass the largest investment of new resources into our state's Medicaid program since the ACA Act. People had been trying to do this for 20 years. They couldn't find common ground. They couldn't move the ball forward. I brought everyone together. We hammered out a solution and we got it done with unanimous bipartisan support. And so what I saw in Delaware, yes, I was in Dover, not DC. Yes, I was in a Democratic majority. But what I saw is that if you are willing to do the hard work of democracy, to go into the unfriendly spaces, to have the difficult conversations, to speak with people across disagreement, you can gain unlikely allies, you can take some of the wind out of the sails of opposition, and you can move progress forward. It's not always easy. It's also not always fair, but it is worth it because progress is worth it. And I decided to run for Congress, despite how dysfunctional that place is, because of how dysfunctional that place is, because I believe we have to have people who know how to make government work, who know how to deliver for people, and who are willing and able to go into sometimes the unfriendly and hard places to have the difficult conversations, to open hearts and change minds, to convince people of the rightness of your cause, whether it be healthcare or paid leave or LGBTQ rights or reproductive freedom, to go into those spaces, to build the coalitions necessary to deliver for people everywhere.
And when you did win election in 2024, as Delaware's at-large representative, you became the first openly trans member of Congress. And in a piece that you wrote you were interviewed in, for Roll Call, you discussed visibility as a first trans representative, saying that there's a lot of people in the country who don't see themselves reflected in government, and they deserve to see that. But on a day-to-day basis, it's not what I'm talking about or thinking about. It's not what voters are talking to me about. That piece was obviously written before you held office or before you won office. Now that you do hold office, do you think that perspective has shifted at all, or are you still very much committed to the idea of, obviously it's important at a broad level, but on the day-to-day kind of aspect, it's not necessarily the case?
I think what I meant by that comment was, I can do my job and my gender identity doesn't get in the way of me doing my job. And that it's not like I'm going into every space and the only thing on my mind is my trans identity or my gender identity, right? That like I can go in and I can work on healthcare, I can work on paid leave. And at a time when there was a $200 million ad buy nationwide going after trans people, it wasn't what I was hearing from constituents. They weren't talking to me about the Kamala Harris, the anti-Kamala Harris ad that Donald Trump put on. They weren't talking to me about trans issues that were trying to be stoked by the far right. They were talking to me about the cost of living. They were talking to me about healthcare and paid leave and childcare and housing and groceries and utilities, and that those would be my focuses. And I think it is important that when you are a first, there are going to be people who are out there who want to reduce you to a caricature, who want to reduce you to a activist rather than an elected official. And the reality is activism and advocacy are critical roles. They are different roles than being an elected official, where you have to represent 1 million people and work on all of the issues that matter. And part of the responsibility of being a first is to prove to people and show people that you are more than just one thing. As proud as you may be of that one part of who you are more than that. And the only way you can guarantee in a place where, there's never going to be a majority trans district, where you have to represent 1 million people, most of whom are not trans. The only way you will have other people in elected office from the trans community is if the first shows that a trans person can run, work on all issues, reject the caricature that the right seeks to put on us, and deliver for people on all of the issues. And that doesn't mean ignoring trans issues. It means making sure that you're working on all of the issues. And obviously, trans people are at the center of right-wing attacks. And we've been able to stop every single anti-trans bill or provision from becoming law. But the power that I have for the trans community most significantly is helping the country see that trans people are full people, situating us in our full humanity and in the rich tapestry of the diversity of this country, that when we're elected to public office, yes, we bring an important lens to a conversation that too often is not present, and we're damn good legislators on all of the issues.
Before we jump into those issues, because I do want to focus on, obviously, right now the war in Iran is on everyone's mind, and it's something that I'm very interested to hear your perspective on. But before I get there, I do want to focus on one of the incidents that happened very early on when you became a member of Congress, when Republican legislators, your colleagues, were misgendering you and tried to bring that national anti-trans debate to Capitol Hill with regards to even access to bathrooms. That included your Republican colleagues, Mike Johnson, Nancy Mace, Representative Self. After that policy was passed to bar transgender people from using the bathrooms corresponding to their gender identity, you told The Guardian that you are here to fight for you're not here to fight about bathrooms, you're here to fight for Delawareans and to bring down the costs facing families. Some trans people afterwards felt that that response was maybe not fair, but it was the wrong decision by not fighting back. Do you feel that your decision to not address that and to, again, address the issues which matter most, which is the bread and butter cost of living things, do you think that was the right decision in the end?
I am 100%, 110% certain that I made the right decision. I made the right decision for a whole host of reasons. One, I don't quite understand what people would say, like, fight on the bathroom issue. Like, if I said that I was going to ignore the rule, someone could shoot me, right? Like, that's just the reality of it, right? Someone could take matters into their own hands to try to prevent me from using a restroom if I had said that I was going to ignore that rule. And I didn't get elected to be a martyr. I got elected to be a member of Congress. That's one issue. The second is they were doing it to, like, I was never going to defeat that policy substantively. The best case scenario was that the public would take away from that debate a clear understanding of who the bullied was and who the bully was. And and I'm not comparing my experience to these folks, but when the students were going into high schools in the 50s and 60s, and people around them were screaming slurs at them, and they didn't respond, that didn't normalize the slur. It gave the public a very clear visual contrast between who the bully was and who the bullied were. If they had responded, it would have been two people or a group of people yelling back at another group of people. It would have been a pox on both their houses. The public needs that clear visual contrast. That is the entire theory of nonviolent disobedience. That is the whole theory of, I'm not there to claim a toilet seat, I'm there to claim a congressional seat. And that means, unfortunately, taking the indignities that come with claiming that seat on the chin in a way that provides the public with that contrast. But then on top of that, they were trying to caricaturize me. They were trying to communicate to my constituents and everyone else that I was a disruption and I was only there to fight about trans issues, when they were the ones, right? It's the right that is consumed with this. And I had a glimmer of time where the public's attention was on me. I had to undeniably demonstrate that they are the ones that are consumed with being bathroom police. They're the ones consumed with pronouns. They're the ones consumed with gender. I'm just here to do my job. And if I had not communicated all of that to my constituents in the country, we would have not seen two things. One, we would have not seen overnight public opinion change from 60-40, the public believing that Democrats were extreme on trans rights, not Republicans, to 60-40 Republicans being perceived as extreme on trans rights, not Democrats. And then on top of that, in addition to the change in public opinion and in addition to the message it sent to my constituents about what my focus was, despite what Republicans were trying to do, it also communicated to my colleagues that I am not at a 5-alarm fire all the time, right? If you are at 11 on everything from day one, on every issue, people will tune you out. And my colleagues saw from that I choose my battles, that when I come to them and tell them that something matters, they understand it matters. And like I said from the start, I'm really proud that with hard work and conversations, our caucus has remained united in defense of trans constituents and has not allowed, between us and the Senate, a single anti-trans bill or major provision to become law. And I know that if I had responded differently then, if I had done what would have felt understandably, viscerally comforting to some people in our own community, I know that if I had done that, I wouldn't have the credibility with my colleagues to actually, in the same way, to actually lean in when it mattered for people that weren't me or weren't on Capitol Hill.
All right, let's transition into those things that are very much on the minds of voters, of everyday people, of our listeners. Let's start with you serve on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. And right now in the Middle East, the Trump administration has ignited a conflict in many ways. For their reasoning, the country's nuclear program and regime change. Obviously, Democrats do not have a majority in Congress and have been largely unable to restrict the president throughout his first 2 years and first year and a half, in office. What do you think needs to be done right now to curb the president's actions in the Middle East?
Well, the first thing I'll say is indeed we are in the minority and things are very limited. One thing that people don't realize is that we have been more successful at what are called discharge petitions, which is when the minority overtakes the floor, than any other Congress in history since the rule was created that allowed for the discharge petition, the modern discharge petition in 1937. So fortunately, we've been able to take the floor more than most members or most minorities in congressional history. But on this, what's clear is there should be a War Powers Act resolution that forbids this president from escalating. We should not pass what looks like maybe a $200 billion bill to fund this president's reckless war. And at a minimum, we should be holding hearings, public hearings, on the single most important foreign policy decision in probably the last 20 years. I mean, every single committee we've had some hearings since the start of the war, not a single hearing specifically on this war. And Congress's responsibility, first and foremost, is accountability. It's to guarantee that the administration is held to account. It's a whole lot of other things, but foundationally it's that, and we are not fulfilling that obligation. This war is stupid. It was reckless. It was illegal. It is leaving us less safe. It is leaving us with less respect. And it is leaving Iran and the region worse off. And whether that's the Iranian people who are going to be living under potentially a more hardline regime, whether it's other countries in the region who have seen their cities bombed by Iran in response. The list goes on. No one is safer or better off because of this war. And so much of what has occurred was predictable, including the single most consequential outcome of this war, which is the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, which is resulting in a global economic crisis that is not only increasing the cost of gas at the pump, it's not only increasing the cost of fertilizer for farmers, ultimately it will increase the cost of literally everything for everyone, because at some point something is transported. Everything you buy at some point has been transported. And so all of this was predictable and predicted. And the president told the chairman of the Joint Chiefs when it was predicted, don't worry, we'll have won before they could even do that. And so this is just one more example of the incompetence of this administration, the hubris of this administration. And it's one more reason why there should be a war powers resolution stopping him, and certainly not one dime for his ill-fated war of choice in Iran.
Have you been having any conversations with constituents recently regarding those rising gas prices and issues with affordability?
Absolutely. I mean, across the state of Delaware, no matter where I am, people bring up that this president, even beyond the war in Iran, this president went into office saying that on day one he would lower costs. And not only has he not prioritized lowering costs, he's prioritized the politics of division, right? He's prioritized cutting people's health care to pay off billionaire donors and to fund his mass deportation regime. But not only has he ignored cost of living issues, he's actually made it worse, whether it's the tariffs from a year ago, literally a year ago was quote unquote Liberation Day, to the war in Iran. His policies are making the cost of living worse. And people here in Delaware are feeling it. And I will tell you, a lot of people who voted for this president are feeling it and regretting their vote for him because he has broken his central promise to his voters.
So I guess that kind of boils down to, do you think Congress as a whole, your Republican and Democrat colleagues, do you think Congress is doing its job as being a body for the people right now, or is it becoming ineffective against the White House?
With this majority, it is absolutely not doing its job. It has been a rubber stamp for this administration. It has rendered itself irrelevant to the constitutional order we have, to the policies that we have, because time and time again, the cult of personality has let this administration raid the healthcare of the American people, execute an extrajudicial and unconstitutional violation of due process with their mass deportation regime. They have let this administration destroy our alliances, undermine our alliances, and seek to remake the global order without any meaningful discussion. And while the minority has been able to use the discharge petition more successfully than any other minority in history since the rule was created in 1937, like I said, the reality is that the only path out of this is a change in Congress. It's a majority that is willing to hold the administration to account, that's willing to push back, that's saying what we're saying now, which is hell no to money for the mass deportation regime, to say hell no to money for a war of choice in the Middle East, and to say hell no to cutting people's health care and food assistance to pay for tax breaks for people who already make exorbitant amounts of money.
So that brings up the next, I guess, logical step, which is the midterm elections, which are coming up fastly approaching, faster than I think anyone really kind of expects. What concerns do you have specifically about the midterm elections, either for your state or for the makeup of Congress as a whole?
Well, I will say right now that I am cautiously optimistic that if the election were held today, we would see a Democratic majority in at least the House. Part of the problem is the election is not today, right? There's a lot of time between now and then. There's time for people to get complacent. There's time for the administration to seek to interfere in some way. There's time for meddling. There's time for public opinion to change in whatever direction. Hopefully, this president continues on the trend that he has been on where he continues to be unpopular and even more unpopular because, frankly, he deserves to be at 0% based on what he's done to this country. But there's still time. And I think we have to be prepared for a real fight, nonviolent fight ahead of the elections, because Republicans will have exorbitant amounts of money at their disposal to lie, to mislead, to divide, to fearmonger. And those of us who want a different majority in Congress are going to have to be incessant on the doors, making phone calls, posting online, being clear to people what is at stake, being clear to folks the importance of this midterm election. Because I think, look, I'm not one of the doomsdayers that says we're not gonna have a midterm election, right? Donald Trump's gonna do X, Y, or Z that prevents the vote or overturns the election. And I will say, I think elections are too decentralized for that to be a likely outcome. But to steal a phrase that Donald Trump used in 2020 and 2016 which is that we have to win in a way that's too big to rig. We have to win in such an undeniable way in so many places across the country that they can't lie or cheat their way out of a new majority in Congress.
My last question is sort of we wind down, because I know that you're very, very busy. As you continue to represent Delaware, not everyone treats you with decency like some of your colleagues in Congress. How do you continue to work with people who treat you like fellow representatives who have misgendered you and who've tried to restrict your access to bathrooms? And how do you do that, as a representative?
So there's two things that I would say. The first is that the people I have been introduced 100 or more times in Congress, the misgendering has been a handful of times. And that is actually, the fact that it has not been more is a byproduct of the fact that they're doing it for attention. And when I don't give them the response they want, they get less attention. And that removes the incentive for them to do that to me. But my point beyond that is that most of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and I'm not saying this in defense of them, I'm not saying this to praise them, but most of them are not doing that. And part of my job is to be willing to, as I promised Delawareans, work with anyone to help Delaware and stand up to anyone who I believe was hurting Delaware. But that first part means that I'm going to have to work with people who disagree with me, including on deeply personal things. And that is the reality of representative democracy. It is the reality of democracy. It is the reality of coalition building, that you are going to have to work with people who disagree with you. And I think one of the things that I think we have done over the last 10 years is we've started to treat relationships, whether it's coalition relationships, working relationships, relationships of any kind, even just being, connected on social media. We started to treat them as a tool to either reward or punish people for being right or wrong. And I get that impulse and I get that instinct. But if we start to cut people off for not being right yet, then we're essentially cutting off the chance for us to move them and change them. And not only have many of my Republican colleagues come up to me in response to the treatment that I have received to say, I'm so sorry, welcome to Congress, we're lucky to have you, but also let's find opportunities to work together to show people that not everyone here is like that. And it's actually resulted in me being able to introduce more bipartisan bills than any other freshman. I also have seen too many times in my life that the power of our proximity as LGBTQ people is our greatest superpower. And that when someone is proximate to you, when you know someone, when you develop a friendship or a relationship, when you respect someone, it becomes a lot harder to target them and to go after them. It becomes much more uncomfortable. And human creatures are, if anything, one of the things that they seek to avoid is discomfort. And not only does the power of our proximity, of having that relationship, make folks more uncomfortable in coming after us, but I've seen too many times how it creates a synaptic connection in their mind between the policies that are being debated and actual people. And once that synaptic connection occurs, you can't undo it. It doesn't change everything. They're not going to be leading the Pride Parade tomorrow. But I've seen too many times in my life that simply being proximate, having that relationship, building that trust and that respect, over time, slowly but surely, can change hearts and minds, can change the conversation, and in so doing can change policy. And that North Star, that's partly how I'm able to brace whatever may come my way, brace myself for whatever may come my way. And yes, be proximate to people who say or do things that might be hurtful to me. And I know that we can summon people's better angels if we first are willing to see them. And to see them, we have to be near them.
Thank you for tuning in to Queerly Informed this week here on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University, Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thank you to the entire Queerly Informed team for your work on this week's edition. Also, a huge thank you goes out to Representative Sarah McBride for joining us on today's Queerly Informed interview installation. Join us back here next week to hear the latest in queer news, as well as commentary from our group of LGBTQ reporters. As always, if you have any suggestions for stories or content that you would like to hear, send them our way through email at queerlyinformedwrhu@gmail.com. For Queerly Informed, I'm Camryn Bowden. Thank you for tuning in.